For most people, the caboose is the missing piece of American railroading. You remember it, that bright red car at the end of a freight train, a symbol that made trains feel complete. But if you look at modern freight trains today, that caboose is gone. And it didn't disappear slowly over a century, the way steam locomotives did. In many places, it vanished in what felt like one generation. So what happened? Did cabooses become useless? Did railroads suddenly get safer? Was it just technology or something else? In this video, we're going to break down the real reason cabooses disappeared from modern trains and the exact systems that replaced them. Because the replacement wasn't one thing. It was a whole new operating model. And once you understand that model, the modern railroad makes a lot more sense. What a caboose actually was. The caboose wasn't a decoration, it was equipment, and it was a workplace. For decades, a caboose served three big roles. First, observation. The rear crew could physically watch the train. They looked for shifted loads, dragging equipment, smoke, sparks, hot bearings, broken rigging, problems the locomotive crew simply could not see from the front. Second, protection. If the train stopped unexpectedly, someone had to protect it. Before modern radio coverage and today's dispatching tools, that could mean sending a crew member back with flags, lanterns, or signals to warn other trains. Railroading used to be far less forgiving. Third, operations and control. The caboose was where paperwork happened, where the rear crew coordinated, ate, waited out delays, and acted as the rear office of the train. It wasn't glamorous, but it was functional. So cabooses existed because trains were long, heavy, and fragile systems, and railroads needed human eyes at the back to keep things from going wrong. That's the baseline. Now the question becomes, what changed enough that railroads were willing to run without that? The simplest answer, railroading changed. People often assume the caboose disappeared because one invention replaced it. That's not really how it happened. Cabooses faded because multiple systems evolved at the same time, and together, they made the caboose less necessary and more expensive relative to the benefits it provided. The big shift was this: railroading moved from a world where humans were the primary safety system to a world where devices and procedures became the safety system. That transition didn't happen overnight, but once it crossed a certain threshold, cabooses became the next obvious cost to remove. So let's talk about the exact things that replaced cabooses, in practical terms. Replacement #1. Radios changed everything. If you had to pick one change that reduced the operational need for cabooses, it would be reliable two-way radio communication. Before radios were widespread and dependable, rail crews depended heavily on hand signals, lantern signals at night, written train orders, and procedures built around limited instant communication. A caboose crew wasn't just watching. They were part of the communication chain. Once radios became standard, the railroad could coordinate without needing people physically stationed in a caboose to relay information. Radios didn't replace observation, but they reduced the caboose's role as a communication hub. And once communication improved, the next question became simple. If we can communicate instantly, do we still need a full car as the platform for rear-end operations? That's where the next replacement comes in. Replacement #2. End-of-train devices, EOT. This is the big one. The end-of-train device, often called the EOT and sometimes nicknamed the Fred, is the most visible caboose replacement. At a basic level, an EOT provides a rear marker light, so the end of the train is visible, brake pipe pressure monitoring at the rear, data transmission to the locomotive, and in some configurations, an emergency brake application capability. From a management perspective, the EOT solved two problems. First, it gave the front crew awareness of what was happening at the rear, at least in terms of brake pressure. Second, it provided a standardized, relatively cheap way to mark and monitor the end of the train without hauling a full caboose. And it did this without paying wages, benefits, or dealing with a crew position tied to that car. That last part matters, because the caboose wasn't just equipment. It was equipment tied to labor. Now, important truth. An EOT is not a perfect caboose replacement. It does not replicate human observation. It cannot visually inspect loads or spot mechanical issues that aren't reflected in pressure data. But it was good enough for what railroads wanted: the minimum functional requirements to run safely under the new operating philosophy. And once EOT devices became standard, the caboose became harder to justify. Replacement #3, wayside defect detectors. If the caboose was the human observation system, defect detectors became the infrastructure observation system. You've probably heard them on radio recordings. Hotbox detectors, dragging equipment detectors, wheel impact load detectors, acoustic bearing detectors in some areas, and more. These devices are positioned along the track and automatically scan passing trains. They don't replace a human on the train, but they reduce the need for constant onboard visual inspection by catching major defects before they turn into failures. The key shift is psychological and operational. Instead of relying on a caboose crew to spot issues while moving, railroads increasingly relied on scheduled inspections, trackside detection, standardized maintenance procedures, and alerts that trigger a stop when thresholds are exceeded. So the system changed from watch continuously with humans to scan periodically with equipment. Again, not perfect, but scalable. And scalability is what modern freight rail is built on. Replacement #4, better brakes, better procedures. Another reason cabooses became less essential is that train handling and braking systems evolved. Air brakes became more standardized, operating rules became more standardized, and railroads tightened procedures around inspections, crew responsibilities, and communication. That doesn't mean trains became simple. They're still complex. But the industry moved towards systems that could be reliably repeated with fewer roles. In older railroading, there were more human layers. People existed because each layer prevented disaster. In modern railroading, fewer layers exist, but each layer is reinforced by technology, rules, training, and infrastructure monitoring. The caboose was one layer. The industry replaced it by strengthening other layers. The real reason. Cabooses disappeared so fast. So yes, with radios, EOT devices, defect detectors, and standardized procedures, cabooses became less necessary. But less necessary doesn't automatically mean removed. Here's the missing link: economics. A caboose costs money in multiple ways. It's another car to maintain, inspect, and repair. It's another asset to track, store, move, and manage. It's another piece of rolling stock that can fail and create delays. And in many cases, it's tied to crew positions and operating practices that management wanted to simplify. If you're running a railroad, you don't just ask, "Does this still work?" You ask, "Is this still worth paying for?" At scale. And that word matters: scale. One caboose isn't a big deal, but a caboose on thousands of trains across thousands of miles day after day, that's a cost structure. Once the new operating model was good enough, removing cabooses wasn't a technical decision anymore. It was a business decision. That's how industries actually change. Not when the old way stops working, but when the new way works well enough. And it's cheaper. And when railroads found a cheaper way to keep rear-end visibility and basic monitoring, the caboose became the obvious target. Not because it was useless, because it was expensive. Why cabooses still exist, but you don't see them? Now you might be thinking, if cabooses were truly obsolete, why do we still see cabooses at all? Because cabooses didn't vanish from the planet. They vanished from mainline freight operations. A lot of cabooses survived, just in different roles. Some became yard-shoving platforms where having a safe place for a worker to ride and observe during switching still makes sense. Some became maintenance-of-way support cars. Some became training cars or museum equipment or preserved heritage pieces. And in a few cases, especially on short lines or specialty operations, a caboose-like car might still show up when the job calls for it. So cabooses didn't disappear because they had no use. They disappeared because the big railroads no longer needed them for standard freight operations under the modern model. In other words, cabooses are still useful. They're just not worth the cost for the way modern mainline freight rail is optimized. The transition was not just progress. At this point, you understand the mechanical side, what replaced cabooses, and how those replacements work together. But there's another layer, and it's the part people feel even if they can't explain it. The caboose was a workplace, a human presence at the back of the train. When that disappeared, railroading changed culturally, operationally, and economically. Because when you remove people from a system, you don't just change the headcount, you change the rhythm of the work. You change how problems are noticed. You change what the railroad considers normal. And that leads to the question this video is not fully answering, on purpose. If cabooses were removed and the system worked, who benefited most and who paid the price? Because that story is bigger than technology. Technology explains how cabooses could be removed. Economics explains why they were removed. But the consequences, the trade-offs, are the part most people never hear. And that's exactly what we're covering next. So here's the answer. You don't see cabooses on modern trains because railroads replaced them with a new operating system. Radios for reliable communication, end-of-train devices for rear-end marking and brake pressure monitoring, trackside defect detectors for mechanical detection at scale, and standardized procedures that moved safety from human observation to system monitoring. Cabooses didn't vanish because trains became easy. They vanished because railroads built a model that could run without them, and it saved money. But that raises the next question. If the caboose was a job, a safety margin, and a human decision point, what was lost when it disappeared? That's what we're covering next. Watch Part 2. Why railroads killed the caboose, and who actually paid for it. Because the caboose didn't just fade away, it was removed for a reason, and somebody paid the price.